Hello everybody, welcome to our studio online. My name is Grace and tonight we will be painting this cute little rooster up here together. So a little bit about us, we are Creatively Uncorked and we popped the cork back in 2014. We do public events, private events, and now online, and I'm happy you guys could join us tonight. So tonight we just have two rules. The first one is just to have fun, and I know none of you will have any problems with that. The second one is a little more tricky, but it's no negativity. So our paintings won't look exactly like this one here in the example, even mine won't, and that's okay. So just embrace whatever you make, just roll with the punches. It'll look similar, but it won't be identical. So make it your own and just own it. If you have questions tonight, you can throw them in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as I see it. If you're like, Grace, how did you do that technique? Can you show that a little bit better? Or, whoa, slow down. I can do that. So just let me know if you need anything and I will try to respond as fast as I can. So get your music going, get a snack, and get ready to paint. Tonight, and also if you like tonight's video, you can go check out our Patreon. Go to patreon.com and search Creatively Uncorked, and you can find access to a ton of our videos. You can subscribe and paint along whenever you want from the comfort of your home. So let's check out what we've got. So many of you ordered the art kits to go from us, and if you did, this is what you'll find. If you didn't, that's fine, just follow along. But inside of your box, you have instructions, you have your pre-sketched canvas, some brushes, your paints, and what you have to get for yourself is a cup of water, a paper plate for your palette, and I definitely recommend 1 to 2 paper towels so that you can kind of keep your brushes clean. You may also have to get fresh water at some point tonight. I would definitely recommend that so our colors don't get muddy. But these instructions that you have in front of you, if you did order our kit, are exactly what I'll be following tonight. So if you get a little bit behind of a step that I'm on, don't worry, just stick to what you've got in front of you and we'll just keep rolling. Don't forget their instructions on the back as well. So we're actually going to just jump right in, and I'm going to start by uncapping my paints. If you didn't order our art kit to go, that is totally fine. Just paint along the best you can and start color matching. Use your best judgment and just follow along, have fun. So what we're going to start with first is our bristle brush or something similar, something with a little bit more firm bristles. You can see up in the top right of your screen. I'm going to put a little bit of water on my brush, take some paint, some blue paint, put it on my palette, and then I'll also dip into the white. Try not to get too much blue and white mixed in this little white cup if you've got it at home. Just scoop from the side and take it out and put it on your palette. Pretty hefty amount there. Okay, so I'm going to mix just a little bit of blue with my white. So our goal really, if you look at the example up in the right corner, you see that it's a little bit lighter kind of by the tail of the rooster, and then it gets darker out to the left side of the canvas. That is what we're going to shoot for. So I'll load my paint up and I'm just going to start loosely putting some brush strokes around the rooster. And your canvas might be quite a bit bigger than mine. My rooster takes up a lot more space just for the convenience of having all of this on our camera. So you want these strokes to be really messy and loose. They don't have to be super well blended. So I'm going to come back in, take some white, and just make it a little bit streaky. You want to get as close to the rooster as you can without covering your pre-sketched lines, but if you do, that's okay. We'll come back in and we're going to cover some of those up anyway. So don't worry about little mistakes. There are no mistakes. We're just going to come back in and cover it up as needed. Okay, so you can see I'm kind of just making some really loose brush strokes and mapping out where I want certain values. If your paint isn't spreading very nicely, add a small amount of water. I try to wipe a little bit off on the cup here, dab some on the plate, come right back in and keep painting. So the further left I go, I'm going to start adding a little bit more blue to my brush, continuing with some strokes that go in all different directions, being careful not to cover too much. All right. If it gets a little bit too dark, no worries, add a little bit more white. Just keep alternating between the two until you find the right shade that you want. And as you can see, I've already covered up some of the details and some of those waves on the top of the rooster, but I will show you how to correct that later. Another thing to note when you're painting the background, a lot of people like to paint the edges of their canvas. I won't just for the sake of time, but if you want it to look more complete, I recommend doing that. And it's easier to just paint the edges as you're going right now while you have the colors in front of you. Also, only stop with about a quarter of the canvas left right here, because that's where the grass will be. So I'm going to stop my blue paint right here. And I'm going to make a jagged edge like that because the grass will come up and fill in those spaces. So it will be a very imperfect edge. Try to make it as even as you can. Tricky part is getting right in here by the face. Just take your time. Okay. Once I'm happy with this side, I'll start coming back over to the other side of my canvas. Maybe I want a little bit more white right in there. Maybe you want to get really crazy and throw in some other colors. But I'm going to keep my sky blue. All right, keep pulling this down. You want to do the same thing around the tail that you're doing with the horizon for the grass. Just make this very jagged edge, since that's kind of how the feathers will go. So I'm turning my brush sideways instead of having the wide flat end. I'm turning it this way and using the skinnier edge to pull up into the tail here. And I'm also trying to line up, being mindful of my horizon line where that's going to be. So I don't want the grass to be super long on one side and really short on the other. Just pull these colors down around the rooster. Okay, and you can see a lot of my strokes in here. They aren't all uniform, they're not going the same way. It's just kind of a messy, more abstract sky that we're trying to create here. Okay, next I'm going to clean off my brush really well. Just kind of rubbing it gently on the bottom of my cup here to get all of the paint out. One thing to remember, I didn't mention this at the start, but you should always keep your paint brushes in your cup of water if you're not using that brush, because the paint dries very quickly. If you're familiar with acrylic, you'll know this. But if you let it dry on the brushes, your bristles will get crusty and your brush won't work as well as it did before. So bear that in mind, try to keep it in the cup. Okay, so once you're done with the background, we're going to move on using our smaller brush. This is the size that I have to work with. If you don't have this exact brush, that's all right. Use something similar or whatever came in your kit, but we're going to go to the smaller bit. And now we're going to do something called color blocking. So this rooster has a lot of details in it, as you can probably tell, and we don't want to go throwing in all of these crazy details just yet. First, we want to kind of map out the areas of where certain colors will be. So as you can see, if you have instructions, we're going to start shading in orange sections. You have red and yellow. I recommend that you take a lot of yellow and a little bit of red, because this red is very strong and will overpower other colors pretty easily. Now my water is already super dark blue, and this, if I use this water, it's going to carry over into my orange. So I have a second cup here of clean water, and that's what I'm going to use. If you need to go grab another cup, take time to do that just so your colors don't get too muddy. Now I'm going to scoop a little bit of my red out of the cup here, and I'm just going to put it to the side first, and you can see that down in the bottom corner of your screen. Just take a little bit of red, start mixing until I get an orange that I'm happy with. Okay, I'm going to make quite a bit of it since it needs to cover a lot of areas of the rooster. So I think that'll be enough to cover my bird. So for this step, we're going to cover most of the white spaces in our canvas here. Okay, so I see that there's a lot of orange up on the head here. We're going to go just behind the eye. And it's okay if you color in some areas where there's going to be red. The red will come in and cover that up quite nicely. I'll do a little color block here. The beak is that beautiful bright color. Don't worry, I didn't forget about the grass. You can see in your instructions that it says to go sky and then grass. I'm going to do my little color blocking section here since some of my horizon line isn't dry yet, and as soon as I do my color blocking, I'm going to come right back to the grass. So don't worry, we will have some vegetation in there. And if you did get some blue in areas where orange is, you might have to do a few coats. Just be patient with it, let that dry, come back. There's a little patch here up on chest and kind of shoulder area. You don't want to add too much water during this step because the yellow and the red are already pretty thin colors. If you find that it's not covering super well, you can clean your brush off. Dip back into the white and pull some more white out onto your palette here. Mix just a little bit of white in it, and that'll make it a lot more opaque. Will cover your surface a little bit better. Okay. At this point, I'm kind of covering up some of the rough blue areas that I maybe accidentally got on my bird, and that's all right. So we're just going to smooth out those areas. Try not to leave any white space if you're painting the edge of the bird. I'm going to fill all that in here. Okay. All right, I'm going to come down here. There's just a little bit in the chest area, and most of this will be covered with other colors, but we'll just get kind of a general idea of where everything is. There's this really beautiful highlight up on the leg here. I'm going to fill this in, and it's a lot darker once we add in details. But again, this is just called color blocking. We are only mapping out certain areas. Even if there's a little bit of orange, put some in that area because it'll pop through. So right now, you're looking at it, and it doesn't look like much of anything. There's always an awkward phase with paintings, and if you keep going through and if you're patient with it, you will absolutely get through the awkward phase. But here's our awkward phase so far. All right, I'm going to put that back in my lighter cup of water, that brush, and I'm going to go back to my blue water. Since we will have some blue tints in our grass, I'm not too worried about this one making my colors muddy. So we're just going to hop backwards to that background step. All you're going to do now is take some green, plop that on your palette, and then you can use a little bit of yellow too. I'm going to pull a little bit of yellow. I'm going to make a mess here. And pull that down onto my palette. So, okay. So I've got these two different shades of green now, since I've got a little yellow in there. I'm just going to start with that. All you're going to do is turn your brush toward the skinny side, and we're just going to do scribbles. You're literally just going to scribble like a little kid with a color crayon when they find a wall that they're not supposed to. Just scribble all over, up and down. Just get a good base coat. It can be pretty thin for right now. Be very careful when you get near the rooster again. And try to go around the legs as much as possible. You might have a little bit more leg showing on your canvas than mine. Just kind of take that intermediate color and keep filling in here. A tip for the grass, just to create some difference in tone, we're going to keep it a little bit darker up by the horizon, and then we'll pull in some lighter values the closer you get toward the rooster, to the forefront of the image. So okay. Don't forget to paint the grass in between his feet too. All right, there's our very basic background. So I'm going to take just that dark green and do a couple scribbles right up by the horizon. Don't be afraid to overlap your blue a little bit if it's dry. Even if it's not, it should cover nicely. If you see that your paint's getting thin in some areas, like mine is here, that's all right, we're going to come back in. So now I'm going to take a little bit more yellow from what I have over here, trying not to get all of it mixed up with green. And you can see it's really bright right when I start, but I'm just going to start scribbling that in. You don't want like a really big block of that yellow, you just want like little sections kind of thrown in here. So I'm going to pull this color out, spread it. Just going to add some depth to our grass. Remember to do this between the feet too. That's a part that gets forgotten, and then it looks like it's a different shade when we're done sometimes. Okay, so now I'm going to clean off my brush a little bit and dip into the white. So I have a little bit of white here on my palette, and I'm going to mix that with my lighter green color and start pulling that in. It might seem super bright at first, but we'll blend it out a little bit. Really want this to be dramatic, so we have some bright colors. Remember, the rooster will be very bright red and oranges and everything like that, so that will be the main center of attention. But we still want the grass to have a little bit of depth. Don't be afraid to put in some different colors. I might want a little more yellow in here. Okay. then once you have some of those light tones, don't be afraid to come back in with a little bit of dark in some areas and just pull that in there. Make some shadows. We always draw grass to be just one solid green color when we're little kids, but if you really sit down and look at it, you see that there are a lot of colors in there. We're just going to create that illusion in here. Some depth. Okay, so I'm happy with my grass. Now I'm going to put my brush back in my darker cup of water. Can let that dry a little bit, and if you want to come back in later and add some more highlights, you absolutely can. Okay, so back to following the directions. So we just went through our background here, we color blocked our bird, and nearly all of the canvas should be covered. So now we have a little bit of a dry break. If you guys have any questions, throw them in the comments and I can answer them. If you need any more clarification, I'm very happy to help. So the next part will be kind of filling in the rooster tail, and then we'll get to all the fun details on the body of the bird, make him pop and come alive. And this might also be a good time to mention, since we have a little dry break, that we now have a deal. So if you order 3 art kits to go, you can get free shipping as long as they're going to the same place. You just have to make sure they're going to the same location, and you can use SHIP3 for the coupon code, and that will get you a nice little free shipping deal. If you like these, you can keep following along. Okay. So my rooster is mostly dry since I did a pretty thin coat of orange. And I'm going to move on to the next step. I'm going to take my small brush, clean all of the orange out of it. We don't want any of that orange in the tail yet. And I'm going to take only dark blue for now. We're going to fill in the entire tail. You kind of want to use strokes that are going to follow the direction the feathers are going. So I'm going to start at the base of the body here and just pull straight back. I don't want the ends to all be uniform, so I'm just going to do thin little strokes, and maybe there are different lengths in here. But we do want to cover all of our white space. This is really our base coat that we're going to be building off of. Kind of try to map out right here where you want the red to stop and the blue to start. I'm just going to pull these colors up and around. If you want some different sized ends, turn your brush the skinny way again. And you can make them a little bit more detailed. Just kind of gently lift your brush off when you get to the ends there, and it'll make this really free, quick brush stroke. Flows off of the canvas there. So I'm starting to see that my tail's getting kind of uniform, and I want it to have a little bit more variation. Just try to keep those strokes going different lengths. Okay, so I'm getting toward the bottom of my tail here now, and I filled in quite a bit of it. We're going to throw in a little bit of red to the bottom. All right, there's the tail. So once I have all the blue mapped out, everything's covered. There's no white space. I'm just going to dip into my red, take a little dot of that, mix it with some blue on my canvas. On my palette. Don't mix it on your canvas. That might not end well. And we're just going to pull a little bit of red up in here. It looks like a super dark purple right now. If it's too faint, take a touch of white. Just like hardly any at all. You want it to be very, very subtle. And I can pull that up. You don't want to pull it too far into the tail, just a little ways. I want mine to be a little bit brighter, so I'll just take some more, just pure red. And you don't want to blend this a ton. This is just a quick little detail that'll make it pop. Okay. Okay, so I'm happy with all the colors I've thrown in there. And next we're going to move on to adding in some shadows on the bird. So it's kind of like the color blocking we did earlier with the orange, using just orange, and now we're going to use just blue. So just look at the darker areas of the bird. Sometimes I kind of like to squint at the reference photo and just not look too deeply at the details, but just kind of squint at it and just really see the shapes that these dark colors make. And that's what we're going to shoot for. So I'm going to take only blue. And I see that the leg down here is very dark. We're going to fill this in completely blue. We'll come back in later and throw in some red highlights so it's not so flat. And that extends to about here where the bird's kind of chest is, or the belly. And I'll just create that shape, leaving some space. Then there's a little bit of a shadow down here on the leg. Remember, this doesn't have to be perfect yet. We're really just making a map. One thing to note before you get too crazy with this step, leave this little bit of the leg white for now, because we'll come back in and fill that in orange if you haven't already. I'm going to go around this highlight. Kind of looks like a drumstick. That's what we're doing. We're just outlining the drumstick and pulling those blues up into here. It even goes all the way up into this orange here. Maybe just a little line of blue. Try to add a little bit of paint if you're going over the orange. Add like a little bit more so it kind of covers what you have and it doesn't peek through too much. I'm going to make the blue butt right up to this orange here. And there's a lot of shadow back here on the lower part of the bird. And then the red really extends down and covers over here. So I don't have any white between my grass and the blue areas of the rooster. You can also see that there's a little bit of a shadow under his beak. I'm going to come up in here. Careful not to go out on the red here, but just fill in a little bit of blue, kind of scribbling. Pull that down. There's also some darker values up here. Just a thin little shadow. Give him a nice little mohawk. Okay. Kind of look like we have a punk rock rooster right now. Okay. Got some blue back here in the tail, or in the wing, just before the tail. Just going to scribble and leave some white. Alright, I'm pretty happy with my color blocking so far. Now we're going to come in and fill in the red areas. Just going to clean off my brush really well so this red is vibrant. Maybe wipe it on your paper towel, make sure you don't have too much color in there because it might look clean and then it'll surprise you. Okay, so now I'll just go in and take some red, put it on my palette, and do the exact same thing, just filling in red areas. This red is a little bit transparent, so we're going to have to do a couple coats if it's covering any blue, like mine is here. It's okay if you cover where the eye is supposed to be. We'll come back in and fill all of that in later. Really still just color blocking. I might throw a little bit of red on top of some of my orange, like how it pulls up in here. We don't want that white space between the colors. This is just to make them meet. The red will look a little bit pink. We're going to add another coat of this, or just be generous with the amount you're putting on. Red kind of extends down here just to the back, right before this little curve starts, and then I'll stop it there. Okay, now I'll come and throw some red in down here. I'll overlap the blue. It's okay if you can see it through there. We're going to make an intermediate color and really make those come together a little bit more nicely. Again, it's okay if your paint comes off the edge here and goes over the grass. Since the feathers aren't completely uniform, they have a little bit of texture. There's also a little bit of red in here. I'm basically just filling in all of the white areas with red now, and then we'll add in some details. So up here at the top of his head, I'm going to actually cover this blue, and it'll make more of a purple for my shadow. And then we'll make an intermediate and really pull that together since it looks very separate right now. Okay, so I'm going to make a little bit of some light orange here too to fill in the leg. Just mix some yellow, and I missed his little leg here, so I'll just come back in and quick do that. Alright, so we have a very rough looking color blocked bird. Now let's unify everything. So, what we're going to do, as you can see by your instructions, we just filled in all of the red. We'll make some light yellowy orange and go ahead and throw in some highlights now. So I'm just going to mix red, yellow, and white. You can see that down in the bottom right. I'm going to add quite a bit of white to this. It's a pretty powerful color, and not a lot of water on my brush. I want this to be pretty thick to really give him that texture. If we look at our reference up in the right of your screen, there's a lot of highlight in the middle here. Just going to pull some scribbled lines in here, and I think it needs a little bit more white, so I'll go back in and add some white. Really make this pop. And these strokes should almost be like how we started with your background. You want them to be loose and nothing too uniform. It's okay if they cover other colors. This is where he starts to come to life a little bit. The head is quite a bit lighter up here. Come in and add that highlight. I'm going to use just solid white in some areas to make it pop. Oh, and I see a comment. Okay, so I see a comment that says my blue and red are mixing. So if your blue and your red are mixing, that's actually okay, because we're going to make an intermediate color by mixing blue and red to really make them blend together. If it is mixing, just take a break and we can come to this color here where we're adding the lighter highlights. All I'm doing is adding yellow plus a little bit of red and quite a bit of white. So that's how I got this very bright color. And then I start adding some more white to my brush to make it pop more. Got a bit of a highlight just in the center here. I'm going to pull this color down. Okay, at this point, since my red is pretty thin and not covering as much of the canvas as I'd like it to, I'm going to add another coat. Once you've added your highlights, we'll just come back in. If you don't need to do this and your red is thick enough, just keep working on your highlights and your details. And don't be afraid to really overlay some of your other colors. This is where the feathers start kind of coming to life and blending. So I write some of the colors overlay. We're trying to move from the color blocking step to more details now. So as you can tell, this is becoming a little bit more blended. All I'm doing is just adding some red to the edges. And since I have wet paint in there, it's blending pretty nicely. Just a couple short strokes, and that pulls it together very quickly. Just gentle blending right in here. Now I'm going to continue doing that. Make some of my values a little bit brighter. And my brush is pretty much dry at this point. I'm not adding a lot of water. I'm just very gently putting light strokes, trying to pull some red into my lighter areas. Remember, our colors won't all be exactly the same. This is just kind of giving you a general idea of where the rooster's highlights are and all of the shaded areas too. So I see that maybe there's some more red lines pulled up into here, some of the feathers. I'll just gently drag some paint up. Okay. So the trick to blending colors together now is to kind of do all of this while your paints are still wet. So now that I've just gone and added another coat of that red, I'm going to pull the blue and the red together. To do this, I'm going to take my palette and I'll add a little bit of blue to a lot of red, so the blue doesn't overpower it too much. Now I have this kind of intermediate purple color. I don't want very much of this on my brush, so I'll wipe quite a bit off on a paper towel and then come in and just create little scribbling patterns at the junction of the red and the blue, so just where those kind of touch. And you want to overlap both colors slightly. So you can already tell that this is blending and there's less of a difference between the red and the blue than, say, up here. So I'm going to make it a little more subtle. If you find that that purple is like, ooh, that is too strong, go ahead and add some blue and pull blue into that color from your already existing color blocked blue. It's okay to pull the colors out past each other a bit. I'm also going to put a little bit of red, just focusing on the leg here, and pull some red outward. It's really just a balance of trying to blend the paints while they're wet on the canvas by pulling in the two colors you're mixing, just alternating back and forth. I'm going to do that in the other areas. I want some more like that purple that I mixed in here, so the blue it isn't just screaming at me from the canvas. I'm going to try to leave a little bit of these highlights, so there's some yellow peeking through. Don't be afraid to let that pop through. We don't want to cover that completely. But if it does disappear, we can always come back in and add some highlights later, so don't panic if it does happen. But it is kind of a beautiful little effect when it can just peek through the darker colors. You can tell up here on the chest that there's some of those darker colors. It's not completely blue, so it's a little bit of this intermediate purple. I'll just do a couple short strokes. Throw that in around here. Can't wait to see how these turn out, so you guys better post them on the Facebook page. Gotta see how this goes from home. And I want it to be a little bit darker. You can see in the picture, the reference picture, that there's a very dark shadow down here. We color blocked it with blue, but I'm going to throw in some of that purple again, that intermediate purple. Make some more convincing shadow. And I'm actually just going to pull that all the way down the leg. So right now I'm just kind of focusing on the front of the bird. So don't get too close to the details. Back up for a second, look at it and think, oh, okay, maybe I need a little bit more of the blue or the purple in this area, and then go back to it. So take a step back for a second if you're getting a little bit lost on where to go next. Really liking adding some of these darker feathers in here, so I'm just going to keep doing that. Just a little bit of dark purple being scribbled in. You can already see that my bird has some different colors than the reference photo. That's all right. This is my rooster. Okay. Now maybe I want a little bit more highlight, so I'm just going to clean off my brush. Throw in, go back to that like lighter color that we made, and I just think I covered a little bit too much of it up, so I'll just pull in a couple more highlights, just using those same brush strokes, just very small, short, wherever you feel it's needed. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my darker values here. My blue line is very obvious right here, so I'm just going to try to pull that in more subtly. Calm it down a little bit. Just like that. And you can see up at the top right, there's a lot more white in this area in your example. We'll come back, that'll be more of our last step, so don't get too lost in that detail. For now, we're just blending the colors together and making them all meet. Okay. I'm going to continue this to the back of the rooster now. See, my shadows in the front are a lot more dramatic than in the back. Now I'm going to try to make the back match the front by throwing some more blue into the red. Make that purple and just fill this area, and I'm just going to kind of go crazy back here with this shadow. Go a little deeper. And same thing on the leg. Fill in that drummy. Okay. How are we doing? Any questions? It's looking like everybody's keeping up okay. I don't have a ton of questions flying in. Okay, so my wing back here is kind of fading from light to dark. That's what we're shooting for. Pull a little bit of some of these deeper purples up here, but mostly just keeping it pretty dark down toward the bottom. All right, one area that's really standing out to me is this spot right in here. So I want to try to blend these two colors. I'm just going to go back in and add some of this very light highlight color in the center. Just going to block it out again so my paint is wet. Okay, it's all right if it goes out, extends to the blue even, that's all right. Now I'm going to come back in with my red and try to make those blend nicely. Kind of making an orange color. And for this part I'm just going to do like a little bit of a circular motion since this part seems a little bit more smooth. There we have it blended more nicely. You can also come back in if you think your shadows got a little bit dark. They should be drying up pretty much. So you can throw some more red in there. Come back over, make it a little bit lighter. I think my shadow got a little bit dark up in here, but that's okay. I can add some more white and lighter values later. Okay. Now I'm going to go up to the top here and add a little bit of that purple intermediate color to make these blend. Just like that. Add more red in here. I've got a little carried away with my shadow, so throw some more red in and just calm it down. This might take a couple coats of red. So I'll revisit that one in a minute. Okay. To make my rooster pop a little bit more, we have some nice shadows going on, but I think my highlights are lacking a bit. So I'm actually going to come back in and add some more white to my orangey color, even more white than I did before. And don't be afraid to push those values. They're going to be very, drastically different, but that's what makes the bird really pop. I'm even going to add just some solid white highlights in here, just like that. And not too many, just a few very light ones. Maybe just at the top where the light would be hitting him, and then also up here on the head. Like that. A little bit more on his shoulder. Now I lost some of my highlights through here. So same thing, just pull just a couple random lines. There's not really a rhyme or a reason to where the highlights are going to go just in this chest area. Just throw a few in there. If it gets to be too much, that's okay. Like this one looks a little bright. I'm going to wash my paintbrush off. You can just come back in with your now clean brush and pick it up like that. Just kind of pull it. Spread it out a little bit. Ooh, I'm liking those highlights. Okay. A couple more up here on the chest. Just filling in all the details, guys. Just detail work. Okay, now is kind of the time to look at your bird and see, is there any white space? Am I missing any colors? Maybe something needs another coat. That's really what we're doing here. We're just filling in and adding in some of these final feathery details on the body. Then we'll move on to the tail and make that all beautiful and shiny. There we've got a little bit more of a successful shadow. When I throw some red in there, it calms down the blue, just like we did on the legs. Maybe your beak has a little bit of blue in it. Maybe you can come back in and fill that in. Like I have a little bit of blue peeking through. I'm just going to hide that. Okay, once we've got some good textures, we're going to move on from the body and go backward to the tail. So just work our way. Okay, so I'm happy with my feathers for now. Maybe I'll add some detail right at the very end, but I'm going to come in with just white, and you can see up in the right corner that the white just fans out this direction and follows the pattern. So we're going to make big arcing brush strokes here, and all you have to do is just start at the bottom and sweep outward and make it kind of skinny at the end here. So just pull off the edge there. We're just going to repeat this. And I want it to go almost to the edge of the tail, not all the way. Just kind of keep it in the center a little bit. It's alright if the paint gets thin toward the end of it. We just want it kind of bright in the center here. Kind of makes little rainbows and just arcs out to the edges. All you're doing is following the blue that you sectioned off before. Really make this arc more dramatic down here toward the bottom so it can curve and make it all the way down here. At this point, I have very, very little paint on my brush, and I'm just kind of dry brushing some areas in. Just gets very thin. Whoops, I got some blue in there. It's alright, I'll just cover it with some white. Pull that through. Alright, it's alright to throw a little bit of blue into that white too. So maybe you don't want it quite so bright. It makes more of a baby blue color. Turns out that's kind of pretty. Ooh, I like how that's working. Okay. Just gonna pull this out, make these ones a little bit less rough. Got some edges here that went a little crazy. Okay, so I have all the white that I want in the tail, and if you think you need any more highlights back on your rooster, now that he is mostly dry, we can come in with just a little bit of white and very, very little. We're going to just dry brush. So I'll wipe most of the white off of my brush. Oops, I've got some blue in there. I'll wipe most of the paint off of my brush. So there's hardly any at all. Just make very, very thin. And then I'll come in and there's a little bit of white on his beak. So I'm going to fill that in just on the edge here. Got a highlight in here. I have a highlight out here on the wattle. Just a little bit. Just a little bit along the top of his head here. And then this area that I talked about before, where there's a lot of white highlight over the shadow, you really want to make sure that you have hardly any white paint because this will cover very well. And it's going to be bright. So I'm going to get most of the white off of my brush. You can hardly see it on there just to start out. And I'm going to pull a few strokes just over that blue and kind of scribble. I might need just a touch more. Just very short strokes. Leave some space between it. You don't want to cover all the color underneath. Just go on ahead up here and pull it way over into the lighter colors. If you find that you have too much white, that's okay, don't panic, just clean your brush off and you can come in and just pull a little bit off ever so carefully. I want this to come down almost to the highlight on his little leg here. And I'm just going to keep pulling it over until you can't even really see the white over into that lighter area. I want a couple down here on the chest too. A little more in the center. And a little bit on the leg. My red is still a little bit thin, so there are certain areas that I want to go back in detail. Before we add the eye and some other small details, I'm just going to go back in, throw in a little bit more red since it's completely dry. If you find that your feathers are lacking some color, this is some time to throw a little bit of it in. These are kind of the finishing touches on your rooster. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with my feathers and all of his texture. Now I'm going to move on from my rooster here and go back to my grass. As you may have noticed, the green might have dried just a little bit thin, and I'm just going to go back and add some more highlights. And I'm going to use my small brush that I have been using on the rooster. So I'm going to mix some green and some yellow. And to make it a bit thicker, some white. That will help you cover the canvas. So the white takes over the paint very quickly. Add in some more green and yellow. It's a pretty powerful color. White kind of likes to steal the show. So we have to keep throwing in some deeper values. I'll get most of the paint off of my brush. Now this is a very bright green. I'm going to be cautious of that. And also dry brush, just like I was with the feathers. Pulling in some color maybe here. Oop, and there's some thinner areas on this side. We're just going back to that scribbling technique that we used with the big brush. But now we can add in some more fine details. And get a lot closer to our rooster. At this point, just be very careful of your rooster. Try not to cover up the beautiful colors you just made. Now I'm just taking only dark green, making some subtle lines in there for some more shadow. And my grass is still looking a little bit flat. There's not a lot going on in my background. So I'm going to add a little bit more pure yellow and just a few of those. If your yellow is not showing up, like I said, add some white. That'll really help it show up. And it might look like a super bright, intimidating color when it's on your palette, but as soon as you throw a few of those in there and put that in the grass, I promise you it'll look nice. It'll make it pop. Let some of your grass go some different directions. Doesn't all have to go the same way, and this one can lean off the canvas a bit. If you want a little bit of it to overlap your rooster's legs, you can. It might take a couple coats. But if I want some blades of grass coming up here, just peeking around his leg, I can throw that in. Yes, I just got another question. So the type of brush that I have here, you can see the question is, will you share what types of brushes you used for those who don't have the kits? So I just have a small square rectangular brush here. Hopefully you can see that a little bit better. Just a very tiny one. Any small detail brush really will work for the rooster. And then for the background and for the grass, I was using a large bristle brush. So this one has a lot of texture to it, and it really just creates some messy strokes and doesn't blend the colors too much. But those are the only two that I've been using tonight. I know in some of the kits you may have a small round brush or something similar to that. As long as it's something that is little and we can make details with, that'll do. There's nothing too specific for this painting. And now, as you can see back here for this example, this is just white. So it might seem like it's going to be way too bright, but once it's on there with the greens, it doesn't stand out too terribly much. Just adds a nice highlight. Maybe throw a couple between the rooster's legs too. These are really just some kind of messy random tufts. They're kind of soft too. I'm not going to make them super prominent. They're just nicely blended, and I did add a little bit of water for these brush strokes to my brush. So they kind of come together. All right. Just like I said earlier, not all of our paintings are going to look identical. As you can see, if you look closely, there are a lot of differences between mine and the example piece, and that's all right. So just own what you've got, and I hope you guys post these on Facebook because they're super fun to see. I'm happy you guys are all doing this from the safety and the comfort of your home. All right, so I've got some grass covering his leg here. Kathy, you are very welcome. All right, I almost forgot a very important detail. He needs an eyeball. Our rooster is missing an eyeball. So all I'm going to do is take the wrong end of my brush and I'm going to dip it in the white paint. So just a little dot, get it on there. And very carefully, I kind of like to balance my hand on the edge of the table so I don't get too shaky. Just dot it. Make a nice little circle there. Okay, well that's creepy. So now we're going to come in and add some of a pupil, something, you know, so it doesn't look like he just has the whites of his eyes. I'm going to do the same thing and just take blue. And I only want this to be at the front of the eye. I don't want it straight in the center because he'll look a bit cartoony. But in order to make a little bit more of a realistic eye, you're going to have the pupil just at the very front edge of the white. And I want this to be smaller than my white dot. So just a little bit of paint, do a small dot, back up and see, that's too small. So I want to add a little more. I'll just very carefully come back in and dot that in. If you find that the blue isn't covering the white very well, since there is a pretty good dollop on there, give it a few minutes, let it dry a bit, and then try again. But I think I can get my pupil how I'd like it. But if you would like to be patient, I recommend that. All right, so there. I have his eye. Most of my details. If you have your directions, you can see that it says to redefine the outside edge of the bird. We did do some grass, which you can see is the very last step. These are just a little bit of our finishing touches. We don't have much time left. So like the directions say, we'll just redefine the edge of our bird a bit, since maybe your grass overlapped in some places or your blues cut in a little bit. We want it to look like the bird is in front of the background, not the background over the top. So my red did disappear a little bit in here, like you can see, and up here. So now just come back in and very carefully, trying to match your colors as best as you can, just come over and redefine the edge. If there's any white spots, fill them in. Okay, those are really the final details of my rooster, and I'm pretty happy with how he's turning out here. So I am just going to finish this tiny shadow under his chin, and my rooster will be complete. Just a little bit more of a shadow on the wattle, so it's not just popping out of nowhere. I just threw a little bit of blue mixed with some red for a very subtle purple shadow. And just put it along the edge here. Since that shadow from his beak would really be covering some of that. There we go. All right, and there you have it. Your Rise and Shine Rooster. So if you guys have any questions, throw them in the comments, and if you need help with a certain area, I can maybe come back and give you some tips. It's really just your time to add details. Oh, and finally, the very last thing, when you are completely done, and you don't have to do this right now if you're not done at home, you always have to sign your name in the corner so people know it was yours. You should be proud of that. You just spent an hour and a half on this painting. If you're feeling pretty brave, you can use your smallest paintbrush and paint your initials in. I know some people like to use Sharpies too, or you can sign the back if you don't want to take away from your bird. So I'm just going to mix a little bit of a darker green here. That's not going to pop out too much from the grass. Throw my initials in the bottom right. I definitely recommend practicing this if you haven't done it before on your plate. So I'm just going to use the very corner of my paintbrush and throw a G out there and then a little H. So that's what it's going to look like. That's how small it's going to be. Perfect. That's what I want. So now I'll come in, just paint in that tiny little signature. Sometimes people like to put the date on there too, so you don't forget when you painted it. I like to put that on the back. It takes up a lot of space. Okay, and it's very, very subtle. Since it's wet, it's kind of hard for you to see from your screens, but it's there, so. That is the finished product. I'm seeing no questions, but okay. So thank you guys for joining tonight. This video will be posted and it will be up for a few days on our Facebook, and then it will be taken down after about a week. So if you would like to see this for longer, maybe you want to come back a little bit later and check out the details of it and rewind, you can go to our Patreon. So go to patreon.com/Creatively Uncorked, or just go to patreon.com and look up Creatively Uncorked on there. Then you can get access to a bunch of videos. You can go back and see what you want to see, and go check out the details. So thank you guys for joining us tonight. I hope you had fun.